Well, as an atheist, Jim Warner Wallace had a loving family, lots of friends, and a meaningful career as a homicide detective. He was happy and he was content. So what made him decide to become a follower of Jesus? One reason: he discovered that Christianity is true.
Homicide detective Jim Warner Wallace was an atheist who decided to investigate the Gospels like you would a cold case.
I tested the Gospels as eyewitness accounts. I investigated the early history of Christianity, evaluated the nuanced differences between the New Testament texts. I even applied forensic statement analysis to the writings of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And eventually, I started to investigate Jesus as if he was a person of interest in a no-body homicide case.
The evidence that Jesus is the Messiah was unavoidable.
So I'm only a Christian today because it's true.
In his updated and expanded edition of Cold Case Christianity, Jim shares his findings and teaches you how to investigate like a detective.
Please welcome back to the 700 Club, Jim Warner Wallace. Jim, it's wonderful to have you here.
So glad to be with you.
Take us back 20 years, if you will, to that time when you weren't a follower of Jesus and your life was going well. What happened?
Well, I think my wife was more interested. Should we raise our kids with the belief system? And I wasn't raised that way, and my dad was always a very committed non-believer, so I thought I could do what my dad does. I'm more than happy to go to church. If you want to go to church, I don't have to go as a believer. And so I attended a church service with my wife, and the pastor was clever. He threw Jesus in a way I could catch him. He said that Jesus was the smartest man who ever lived. And that provoked me enough to get a Bible. And I thought, is that true? Is he the smartest man who ever? What did he say that was so smart? So I invested the least I could possibly invest. I think I spent $6 or $7 on a Pew Bible. You know, you could buy those still. Sure. And it had very small margins. And I just started reading through the gospel accounts, and I realized, wow, these are making claims by people who are trying to convince me they actually occurred at a specific time in history, at a specific location on the globe. And I thought I could test these the same way you test any account from the past, sure, even if it's from a murder from, a long time ago, or if it's just from a case that happened 3 days ago. We have a process by which we test eyewitness accounts to see if there really are reliable eyewitness accounts. It's actually in the jury instructions in our state. So I simply just said, okay, what's that test? Let me try to apply it to the Gospels and see how they shake out.
So what did you find?
Well, I look at all the things that we all come into a case with skepticism. I certainly was a pessimistic, skeptical person. I didn't think any of this was true because I rejected anything supernatural. So I had to really investigate what even my own beliefs were related to the could God really exist? And as I tested the accounts under these 4 areas that we talk about in Cold Case Christianity, they were passing the test, and I thought, okay, I'm gonna end up in a place where I'm kind of stuck with this account. What do I make of it if I really believe that what the Gospels are saying is true? If it's true, I mean, C.S. Lewis said it best. If Christianity is not true, it's of no importance. If it's true, though, it's of infinite importance. The one thing it cannot be is moderately important. Yeah. And I knew once I discovered that it was shaking out, it was actually passing the test, that I was going to be forced to do something with this Jesus of Nazareth.
Yeah, that was the way you're built, the way your brain functions. Not everybody thinks like that or has that desire to pursue all of that. In fact, a lot of people I hear say, well, the Bible is full of contradictions. Right. People who've never read it. But you speak to that there are contradictions in the Bible.
There are alleged apparently, let's put it this way, there are variations between the accounts. Now, this is very common. The one thing I'll ask people to do, if a dispatch is going to deploy us to a homicide scene and I'm going to be an hour away because it's the middle of the night, I got to get dressed, I'll tell the dispatcher, hey, if you've got officers on scene, which I'm sure you do, have them separate the eyewitnesses, because if you don't separate those eyewitnesses, they will pretty much tell you the same thing because they've been talking to each other for the last hour. I want them not to tell me the same thing. As a matter of fact, when they begin to talk, there will look like there are contradictions in the account. It turns out they're not contradictions. They're just the different perspectives that we all bring as eyewitnesses to any observation. It's our background. What do we find interesting? What do we focus on in any given setting? Where were we in the room when this thing occurred? So those things present what appear to be contradictions that as you puzzle them together as a detective, and look, would you think we'd be any more confident with with the New Testament Gospels if we only had one? I don't think so. Or if we had 4 that were word for word identical, I don't think we'd be more confident. These Gospels have the exact amount of variation I would expect if they were 4 eyewitness accounts, or drawn from eyewitnesses, as Luke says when he's interviewing the eyewitnesses and servants of the word.
So talk about evidential faith. Why is that important, and why should Christians embrace it?
Well, look, when we get to a jury case, I typically tell juries, I'm going to tell you everything you need to know, but I cannot tell you everything that could be known. That I just can't do it. I don't even know everything that could be known. I know that he did it. I don't often know how he did it. But I'm going to give you a line of evidence that's going to point directly to this defendant. It's not going to point a foot to the left or a foot to the right. It's going to point right to him. And it's going to stop short of him. And your unanswered questions are going to be in that gap. You're going to have to step across your unanswered questions to render a verdict. The same is true with Christianity. I'm going to show you all the evidence that points right to this most reasonable inference, that Jesus is the Son of God who rose from the grave. Now, it's not going to point a foot to the right or a foot to the left, but it is going to stop short. Because we all have unanswered questions about God, about our lives, about the Christian worldview. But it's not as we're going to step across those unanswered questions the way you do for everything else you believe, on the basis of the trajectory of the evidence. And the evidence does point to this as the most reasonable inference. It still requires, though, a step of trust across your unanswered questions. And I think that our students, especially our kids, and that's why we try to write a book that's very visual, because we want our students to know this is evidentially true. Because once you know it's true, you're far less likely to step away from it.
You work with young people, you teach young people, you have ministered to young people and planned for them. What's the biggest thing that stands in the way of taking that leap?
Well, I tell you what it is, for the most part, is that students who are able to ask questions, even when we as their parents don't know the answer, are still more comfortable staying in the truth. It's when we don't even allow the question to be voiced because we're concerned, we don't know how to answer it. So we're like, we're uncomfortable with questions. Don't be uncomfortable with questions. Embrace them. It's an opportunity for us as adults. Like I sometimes will say, like, if your kids don't kind of read the book, no problem. You read the book. You're the parent. You'll be the one who can answer their questions later. But embrace the questions. It's when we reject the questions that our students start to wonder maybe there aren't any answers. And that's where we get into trouble, I think.
Well, there are wonderful answers and guides and visuals, as you said in your book. It's the latest and greatest. It's the updated and expanded edition of Cold Case Christianity. Boy, Jim has done all the work for us. It's an amazing book, a great read. Thank you so much for what you're doing. It's so important.
Thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Great to have you here.